All right, we are at 4:30. Brian just became Brian and Jude, splitting in two. I'm impressed by that. Hi, guys. It's exciting to see people's names that I don't entirely recognize. So, good to see you all, and welcome to round two of our session. Not get through packed boxes. Unfinished projects are stashed away in Deborah Long's house. So on the last session, it doesn't matter that if you didn't make it to the last session, but we talked about possibly spending time going through your own boxes while we were in between sessions and doing a little sorting. It's totally okay if you didn't. This is you choose your own adventure, you choose your own pace. But if you have photos of things that you're in the middle of and can't get to the actual projects behind them, we can either bring them up on screen when we start having a little bit of a round robin here, or we can have them posted to the Facebook group. If you haven't joined the Facebook group, you may want to. It's not a very trafficked site location. I'll post all those links up again momentarily when I bring up that block of my notes for myself. Let's see. Looking through all the things I'm expecting to get to today. So in the chat, which you may want to have open during all of this, I will post all of the usual links, and the top one gets you to all the places that you can click through to find my social media and things like that. And then the Facebook group is the second one from the bottom. And again, it's just a project group that I put up there. So if you have excitement about a project in between sessions and you want to get some opinions from people, you can post up there. Or just if you have a question about something or have a tool that you want to know more about. Again, I post once every week or two at most. And usually it's just a reminder about what we've got going on. So if you want to make that more trafficked, I will say yes to that. Oop, one of my cameras is trying to reset on me, so let me fix that. So for those of you that are new to the gang, this is the second project of its sort. This is continuing to do some, I wanted to keep going with some online engagement after finishing the 2-year John Cogswell Creative Stone Setting walkthrough. The videos from that are available on YouTube, all 37 of them. And the crew was asking me, what are we doing next year? So this is what I came up with. And it turns out it's been pretty interesting for me so far in the adventures I've had in preparing for it. And so I think it's going to be proving equally but differently educational for my journey than doing the Cogswell stuff did. And so last time we talked a little bit about the idea of what is in each of our respective boxes and how things might fall into certain categories. And I want to remind you of what those broad categories we talked about were. We talked about things that might be there because you're sort of design blocked on them. You know you have something in mind, but it's not looking quite the way you want it, or there's something missing and you can't figure it out. Those are the exciting ones, because those, if you can get past it, zoom, you're going to have a project that you were already excited about that you can keep going on. They might be materials blocked, like you broke a stone and now you got to find just the right replacement stone, or it doesn't feel right with the pieces you have, or you need to add a specific clasp and you're not sure what you want to design. It could be skills or techniques blocked. So you have a perfect vision of what you want in your head, and it's a little nervous making that you're not sure you're going to be able to do it exactly the way you want, or you don't know what the skill is, but you've seen it on somebody else's work. Those are the kinds of things might fall into that category. It could be that you just can't stand the piece anymore. You got partway through and you're like, this is ugly. This is not what I wanted. Those can sometimes be recovered into the design category, or other times they fall, for me, into the destroy pile. And we're going to do some of the destroy pile today. We're going to do a few different things. I'm going to try and give a little mix of some of how I go about taking things apart, how I go about repairing things, and then I'm going to start on one of my redesign pieces today. And in between, what I would like is for us to do some circling around with what you guys have discovered in your box of unfinished things. I am going to, if I can figure out, they moved the polls on me. I'm going to put up a little survey to see if, there we go, polls. I'm going to launch this little survey, and I want you to just select all the things that you know you've been finding in your box. Thank you for that reminder to spotlight. Although I'm going to probably switch in and out a lot today because I want to have you guys engaged. So feel free to start filling those things in. And the best way to share photos today, assuming you have them on the device you're logged in on, is that I'm gonna give you the opportunity to share screen so that we can see what's on your computer or device. If you don't have that option, you can try emailing them to me, and if they get to me timely, I can try to bring them up. But ideally it would be that you just show them by doing a share screen. Okay, so I'm going to leave that poll running for a little bit, and I'm going to do a little bit of the business stuff that I just need to cover at the outset. Remember that this is not an obligation to come to every event. Pop in and out when you need to. But also remember that whenever you are here, you've agreed by being here to be recorded and let me use your voice and image, because I'm not doing things to sell the content. I'm just putting it up for free, but know that you might be on the recording because we put them up. We're going to do this the third Wednesday every month. Occasionally I'll have a month where I can't make the schedule. When I was doing twice a month, that wasn't so difficult that we'd miss one here and there. When I'm only doing once a month, what I might do is ask you guys in advance, would you rather I do it in a different week if I have the flexibility to do so? But occasionally work conflicts come up and I'll need to shuffle that. I will not only announce it the session before, wherever possible, if I know that it's happening, but I'll also post it in the Facebook group. And if it's an emergency one, I'll send out an email to the list saying, hey, by the way, even though it looks like it's still happening this week, it's not. Remember to be careful in your studio. Take care of yourself as best you can with the safety factor. When in doubt on using a tool or something, get some other opinions before you use a new to you tool. And let's try to keep this a conversation. So even though I'm going to babble at you a lot, I want to make sure that you all feel comfortable to sort of ask and answer as we go. And we're going to also be looking for some things when people have a specific challenge where we need ideas, we need insights, some type of similar project that you may have gotten over a hurdle or what have you. Do please try to moderate yourself and come on and off of mute, just so that if you've got background stuff going on, you're not getting it interfering with the other conversations that are going on. Otherwise, do what you can to enjoy your art. Like, this is about whatever you want to get out of it. And even if you just want to sit and watch what everybody else is doing, that's okay too. I'm going to be going with the flow a little bit more than I was with Cogswell. We had a nice rigorous, like, we're going to be on this chapter, we're going to be trying this setting. So we always knew roughly what we are going to do the next session. And I'm going to be jumping around a little bit more than I was. There is also a Rio for Schools code that you can use to get yourself a discount if you would like, if you are not already a Rio Pro member. See if I can get my chat to behave. Sometimes when it's up with the poll, it's not as happy. There we go.
The price went up. It makes it a lot harder.
Pardon?
Price went up for a Rio Pro, so it makes it harder.
Yeah. What did they move it up to? 5K, 6K, something like that?
5K.
5K, yeah. I think it's been that or close to it for a couple years. Now, maybe a year, maybe the last 2 years it's been at 5K, but yeah, there's always that last push. They're definitely.
It was 3K for a number of years, and then
Was
it went 5K last year. Yeah.
It was only last year, man. I guess I just spend that much even when I shouldn't.
That's because you're more productive than me.
Well, I don't know about that. I just don't have the willpower to not buy the things that I want, especially when it's new tools. All right, so we're getting some interesting results in the polls. The last code that I put up there is the code that you put up in Rio, and it'll get you 6 months of equivalent to Rio Pro. It's not 100% of the equipment at the prices that we get. I think it happens more on the findings and things like that. Not all the tools are cheaper. And what else? Is there any other codes or business? I think that is it on the basic business. So what I'd like to do to kick us off is, as people are finishing the poll, is I'd like to do a little round robin. I'm going to go back off of Spotlight and do a little round robin. If anybody has stuff that they have done in the past month or that they've prepped thinking about this project that they'd like to share, or something that falls into one of those categories that you know you want to tackle right out of the gate. And tell me a little bit about why you wanted to participate in this activity that I'm doing, this weird little adventure that I've set for us. Anybody? Pat, go for it. Okay, let me spotlight you.
Why not? Okay, so this is a bead. Oh,
Can you put your hand behind it? It'll help focus it.
yeah. It's a fused bead that I did and patinaed
Yeah. Cool.
from a Victoria class, but I'm not sure what to do with it. I was thinking I would wanted to put maybe a cap on top, maybe a stone and chain maybe coming off.
Nice.
Maybe.
So, when you were making the bead for the sake of the Victoria project,
Yeah,
I'm assuming
it was
Victoria
just a bead. It was just to be a bead.
just supposed to be a bead, and that's boring you. You want to do something more intriguing to it. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so it was just for the sake of the exercise, you were making a bead. Now you would like the next level of whatever you want to accomplish with it. And it's fused fine silver? What is it?
No, it's
Sterling?
sterling.
Cool.
Yeah, her
Okay.
technique is sterling on sterling.
Nice. Very
Yeah.
nice. And I like the blackened look. Okay, so that's one that you like, you just want to do a redesign on. Or
Yeah.
a continuation of the design, perhaps.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Okay.
So
The other thing I'll ask everybody to do is, do you want ideas from the crowd or do you want to keep moving on your own?
no, I'd love ideas. I'm not real creative.
Anybody have some thoughts on that
Yeah.
piece?
I really like the idea of this as a critical friends group.
Good.
Critical friends are where people give you their ideas. You can take them, you don't have to take them, but it reinforces your life, if you will, and helps you to get outside the boxes you might be stuck in. And so and then the thing that I would offer to the group is that I'm a chemist. So I do a lot with safety training. So if there's questions about safety, I'd be happy to help with some of those things.
That's awesome.
And I'm interested in some layered things of precious metals with found objects. And I have a hard time with the layering. Like I want something to overlap and be set on top of something else. I have lots of things that I picked up over my life that, like, for example, long coral pieces. I wanted to make them into some kind of a necklace. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? And I did find a material that I can absorb onto the coral that will strengthen it so it won't crack so easily.
Nice.
So I need some ideas about how to set like little straight pieces of coral end to end to help my found objects.
Okay, I'm gonna circle back to a couple points you've made. I want to finish up with Pat on whether anybody had any ideas for her about the bead, and then we'll talk about some of your ideas there that you just brought up, Barbara. Anybody for Pat?
I can suggest something that I personally would like. We just keep it simple, but maybe I see it because of the texture in it as something simple on top, whether it's a gemstone or a pearl. I see something top and bottom, and then somehow adding rings on the side so you can add a chain to it. So just because the bead itself is so beautiful, just finish it off on the top with something pretty, or a gemstone, or pearl.
I love that idea. The pearl on top is would be really elegant. If you find the right mabe or something like that on top of it, some gold to bling it up around the bezel. There's a lot that would pull out. It would draw the line up the eye of the eye up the line of the bead. I saw it immediately I saw it and I went, oh, are you making a container? Because it could hold secrets. If you you could put a little scroll in there if you make a hinged top that people can keep
Oh,
things in.
that
Or
would be
I'm
fun.
always forgetting the term for the prayer holder that is done in Jewish doorways. A lot of,
Right.
you're on mute, Paula.
Mezuzah?
Mezuzah, thank you. I love
Mezuzah.
them. They're beautiful,
A
and some
mezuzah.
of the silver work in them is incredible. A lot of times there's they're precious metals as well. So I could see that being some kind of mezuzah on a doorway, or it could be, as you're describing, hanging it and have it, because it's going to be an easy object to cap because it looks nice and clean. You've got a solid top and bottom.
Okay. Make it a
And
vessel.
why waste the inside?
Making it a vessel instead of a bead.
Well, a vessel, I mean, it is still from its heart, the bead, but you weren't going to string something through it from the description you gave anyhow. So you've got the hollow space. By capping it on both ends, it becomes a potential vessel, just as one possibility. Anybody else have other ideas for Pat? Paula, you got some? Oh, waving to Sonia.
Saying hi.
We're trying to decide what to do with this.
Anybody else ideas?
No, I saw it and I wanted to put little gold pieces on it with like little flesh set diamonds, or some kambu. But I like the idea of it being a container as well. But I think also it will be interesting, like instead of just having like some rings coming off, the rings in some way could be incorporated into the design of the lid. And
Yeah.
that way it kind of, it comes all together.
Nice. Brian, were you trying to give an insight as well?
Not on this. I was going to share a project once.
Oh, okay.
I'll be done. I think you're going to
And
talk
any,
with
I'm sorry, any last ideas for Pat before we move on? And then
Yeah,
we'll,
yeah. Hi there, Nancy here. I would just ask, are you totally committed to keeping it that length? Because I'm thinking, what if I cut it in two pieces? I could do more than one thing with it. Or as beads, you could cut it into 4 pieces, or just the thought. Are you committed to keeping it whole?
great way to put it.
Good
Yeah, these
idea.
are all ideas. And if anybody is really worried about getting critiques that they don't want to hear, you can ask for gentle critiques. That's okay. Because there's, we usually split them up in our guild as gentle critiques versus university level critiques. University is going to be a lot harsher and more precise, and may offend you without meaning to. And gentle is a kinder answer from all of us. Okay, so I want to finish up with some of Barbara's ideas, and then we'll go to Brian. So Barbara, you had talked about wanting to do some layering and coral pieces. Now, one note on coral to remember is that certain coral is not allowed to be sold because it is considered endangered. So just know that, and also know that when you're working with coral, it's one of those things that you really need to wear your dust masks on because it can do bad things to your lungs. But otherwise, it's beautiful material used in inlay and some things and so on. And we have
They're like long pieces, and every time I think about doing them, I think, oh, I need to make end caps. I need to do this. I need to do that. I get so overwhelmed with how much work it would be. That's one area. And then the layered pieces, like I have these forms that I make that are more of an ocean theme. And so I have these, crusty old shells that have great texture to them, and I love them. And so I have these represent a starfish that I do in enamel, and I would like to set that up against the crusty piece to give it, if you will, a presence. And
Cool.
so how to layer it on, and that's been a challenge for me.
Yeah. If you're able to, I think we may need to see some of the pieces that you're talking about.
I was gonna go get it. So
Okay.
I'll take leave. You can come back to me.
Okay.
But I
Brian?
like critical friends, and that's what I think
It's a
of
great term.
kind things.
Excellent. Okay, Brian, you had some project ideas that you wanted to share?
Oh yeah. Well, I had let's see. I think I'll try to make it so people can see. So I have this ring. It's a Peter side. I'm not sure if you can. Yeah,
Hang on,
See this.
I'm gonna spotlight you so we can all see it
Yeah.
bigger. There we go.
here we go.
Yeah, nice.
See the flash there. But anyway, it has these, like, I didn't know much, you know, it was an early wing I made. So I put these I made this kind of split bezel with these prongs that go over top. They're not perfect prongs either, so you can see there's gap in there. I gave it to, Jude, but it cuts, she likes it, but it catches on things, I think, is one of the main things. It's not perfectly well down. So trying to think of how to maybe whether it's just has to take out and redo, or if there's something without, like, removing the stone, could do these or set these, or, like, cut off the prongs. But it's that gauge of wire. I'm not sure if I guess cut off these, like, would that be enough to support it? So trying to think of
So
project.
am I also seeing that it has a serrated bezel around it?
Yes, you are. That's correct there. Let's see. As a
So
serrated,
I'm not sure your prongs are actually responsible for holding much of that stone in at all.
yeah, it's more of a design thing.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say too, there, Jude? So it's the potential of me cutting them off, but then I guess one question is the gauge of wire that going to be enough there? Like, is that going to be an issue at all? I'm also, for folks who are in CMAG, we're taking Thomas as Mary Meadows class this weekend, so I'm not sure
Nice.
adding gold in somewhere like could help with the support or something. So kind of open to ideas if people think just cutting them off is enough, or we should somehow.
If it's okay with you, and can I give you some feedback on the overall design?
Yeah, you could.
Okay, so this to me feels like a project that you knew exactly what you wanted it to look like, and you didn't entirely feel satisfied with the skill that went into this particular instance of the ring. That you weren't satisfied with how you finished it, right? Is that
Yeah, I think this may have been one of my first rings I ever actually made.
Great.
Yeah.
It's great. So
Yeah.
there's two approaches I recommend to students who have done a project like that they're like, this isn't quite what I meant it to be. One is you hang on to that one as is, and you do another one with a similar stone, and you work on improving your technique for how to approach it based on the lessons you learned doing the first one, right? That's evolving your skill, and you'll be able to look at them side by side and go, that's what I meant to do. The other is you take it apart and rebuild it with that same stone, but take a lot of photographs before you do. And what I'm seeing in that is you have salvageable material. Like this one, you don't necessarily have to take all the way apart to make more of what you were aiming for, because your prongs, you just didn't have enough takeaway to get your fold in the prong, right? So if you can gently bend those open again and put a little bit of a crease in there, you're going to have a corner instead of a curve. What you're getting, I'm going to actually spotlight myself for a second because I'm waving hands at people, and I can do sketches if we need to. So right now you've got something that's doing this over the stone, and what you want is for it to do that in essence, right?
Yeah.
So part of that may be putting a corner in it to do a fold. And you have to just be careful not to go too far, but that alone would bring your prongs closer to your stone, right? So that you may be able to do and improve what you've got, or you keep it as representative of where you were when you built it, and you build the next version, the next generation of it to keep you moving forward. If you were to do that hardware.
Yeah, like if I were to do that, I could probably, I could maybe try to keep it with the stone in there, and like, would it be a hardware or like a really thin, like a 8 or like saw blade, or?
So I would go saw blade and tiny triangle files if I were doing it, just because I need a little more control when I'm that close to a stone, and I am terrible with a heart burr, but your mileage may vary, right? And it's the kind of thing where you just need to do a little bit and then fold and see if it folds enough. And if it doesn't, you take that fine saw blade in there and cut a little bit more while it's still at the angle, and then push and cut a little more and push and cut a little more. Yeah, like you can thread your saw blade through there and make it act as your file after you've put your initial fold in. So I personally wouldn't do away with that ring. because it will show you your own personal progress. But if you really want that stone because it's meaningful, maybe you want to rebuild it entirely and envision it more the way you want it. But I don't think what you've done is far off. I think it's just slightly incomplete.
Yeah, yeah, if I knew what I know now, then I would have planned it
Exactly.
right. Right, so
Yeah.
yeah, I gave it to Jude, so it was one of the first things I gave to her. So it had some sentimental, I think.
Yeah, meaningful. Yeah, I get it. Get it.
Awesome.
Did
Thank
anybody
you.
have any other thoughts for
Oh,
Brian?
yeah, if anyone has thoughts.
Yeah, I wondered if, had those prongs that came over, were they sanded on the underside? Sanding them, it gives you, first of all, a little more flex to the metal, so it'll bend over, but it also helps it to seat itself more directly on top of the stone.
Yeah, I'm trying to work underneath. I can't recall it. It's been a little bit. It's flattened a little bit, but I think I might have just hammered it out. I can't even call it. I don't know if I what kneeling or what it's. Yeah, I mean I started it, so got some kind of
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody
So-
else?
Yeah, this is my thought. One, you do have the bezel, and those prongs, in my opinion, are heavy and wide. So one thing you could do, in addition to what Rachel's talking about, is if you thin them out some, like a barrette file, and you can also shape them, to make them quote unquote more interesting. The pieter site's very hard. Take some masking tape and cover that stone as best you can. And that way, because you were talking about, well, what if I just cut them off and then the base of the prong is sitting on the bezel? And and if this sentimental, I think you could refine that a bit and keep it as it is. And the first time we do anything, the learning curve is wonderful. It's what it's all about.
And the 50th. Good deal. Okay, anybody else have something that they want to share about stuff they're pulling out of their box of things?
Thank you all.
Yes, Sonia.
Muted.
Oops, yep.
Okay, can you
There
hear
we go.
me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, so how do I get rid of this thing?
The poll is the poll
Okay.
going?
Okay, I'll show you. I'll give you a back story. So I don't remember, maybe 2016, 2015, I was very much into stamping, metal stamping.
Yep.
And I went nuts and I got all these stamps, and also anyways, one day I made this, right?
Ooh,
And I hammered it,
yeah,
hammered the base, and then stamp something, and then I cut the shape, and then I added the bezel. So 3 operations.
yep.
But now I don't know what to do with it. And I'm just like stuck. And only 3 of them have a tiny hole on top. You see?
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do. Your piece with the first video has a piece where you had trouble also hanging. How is it going to hang?
Yep.
This gauge, I think, is 24. It's very light. These things are very, very light. So what
Are you
do I do?
concerned that they flex too much at that gauge, or?
No, it's not a matter of flexing. No.
Yeah.
It's just, I think the metal is hard because I hammered it. I added texture with hammer, and then I soldered that cross shape.
Yep.
That's sterling? Sterling?
Yeah, sterling solder on. So no, I'm talking about weight. Weight is
Okay.
so light. So what do I do with this?
Well, when you started making it, what were you thinking? I mean,
Bracelet?
they're lovely and you've got 6 of them. So did you think necklace or?
I thought necklace, but I don't know how to hang it in a way that they're not gonna clash. Also, see, the shape is kind of weird. I mean,
Did you
They
have a stone in mind when you put the bezel in?
yeah, turquoise. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah,
But
because there's these. Because that's what my first thought is put turquoise in between them.
right.
And you could take jump rings through the holes, or which is easier if you're doing
You
beading.
mean you mean the you mean the are you talking about the stone that will go here?
No, I'm talking about, you said you had a drill hole at the top. If you put a jump ring through there,
Yeah, I can
either, right, then you could like put 2 round turquoise and then you could do he, she turquoise or something, and you have enough to do earrings.
So you'd be
I like
putting,
it.
you'd be
I
using
like
them
it.
as hanging pendants between beads. Yeah, there you
like
go.
this?
Yeah,
Like this?
in between, yeah, with a few
itself
in
is
between
pretty.
each.
There, like that.
Yep.
I didn't try yet, but that's the only thing that you can think of.
No, there's certainly other things to be done with it. Like that, you could make some beads, some silver beads to intersperse as well. But you could, but if part of the challenge is, do you want them to be sort of thematically, they look a lot like they're inspired by a lot of native work. Are you
Yes,
trying to
yes.
move away from the native look?
Away totally, because that was my conflict. They do it better. So I'm just borrowing the texture, borrowing the little crossy
Yep.
thing, whatever. What about tubes? I don't know. I thought
Tubes
tubes.
could go in
Sure.
between, tubes could hang on the back of them to hold them in place. But the other thing is you aren't necessarily committed to the necklace that you were talking about. You said that they're nice and light. So a
What?
series of them as earrings. What I do when I get stuck on a shape thing like that, a repeating shape, is
Yeah,
I
because
start
they're all the
positioning
same.
them a relative to each other. So what happens if you have one pointing up and one pointing down as an earring, or pointing out at angles, or like an
The
extra
shape,
piece?
the shape is
Yeah.
not this hilarious? The shape is one way on top and one way in the bottom.
Exactly. So now take 2 of them and put them at different angles relative to each other, right? So
Like
yeah,
this?
so that with something in between them, or pointing at each other with the arrow parts pointing towards each other,
Oh,
or
okay.
angled near each other off of one side, so this is part of, once you have a shape, this is one of the most basic design brainstorming exercises that I have students do, which is pick a geometric shape. Doesn't matter what it is, but pick one and draw variations on it, riff on it, bigger
I
ones, smaller ones, layered ones, things with negative space cut out in that shape. And so play with, this is part of what we have to do when we get stuck on a design problem, is break our brain's existing perception of the design and
Yeah.
come up with something that we didn't do before. And it could include really weird angles, like one comes in to the side of the other, or they become bracelet connectors in some way,
Okay.
I also like
That's
the
the
idea
last
of
thing. That's the last thing I would have thought, to put 2 together. So perfect. This is good.
or
It's a good
3, or so play with the numbers, because you have 6
Yeah.
of them and you could always make
Yes,
more.
yes. That's what I'm gonna say.
Petals, all kinds of variations. Somebody else was coming up with an idea on that one?
I was
Yeah.
thinking, like, because they're so light, earrings are possible. And
Yeah.
make them so they're asymmetrical. So there could be some beads and then the silver, or there could be on the other side, silver and then some beads.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that would, again, change up the design a little bit.
Nice. Anybody
Yeah.
else?
Oh, cool. So basically what you're saying, when you get stuck with with something and they're all the same shape, same thing, you can put 2 together and play around and do that kind of stuff.
It's whatever you can do to break your brain's belief that it has to be the way you laid it out, right? So one of the most common design tricks when you're learning how to paint is to work upside down. because our brain won't say, this is how it has to be, and this is where the nose goes, and this is where the eyes goes. It'll go, here are the shapes that make up the form, right? And our jewelry equivalent of that is, don't look at our necklace right side up, look at it sideways, look at it twisted, look at, around something. So get a glass jar and put it around the glass jar with painter's tape and see where they move, or find an object and place them on the shape, and maybe you'll discover some form underneath it that you want to incorporate them in.
Oh, okay. So what happened is I was just in love with well, I don't need an explanation, right? No.
The texture you loved at the time, and it was what you were doing. And I have many, many parts like that. That's totally reasonable. You've got an idea spark, but you can't
Yeah.
quite get followed through on it.
Yeah, and I have many others, but I'm not going to show them all to you now.
One at a time. One at a time's good. Anybody
Yeah.
else have feedback
Thank
for
you.
Sonia?
For me, when I saw it, I immediately thought a bracelet. Either connected as a bracelet, or I also thought like soldering it onto a cuff or something, because you have a series, you can almost do a whole series of different things.
Yeah, that's another good point.
It could be, one can be a ring, one can be a cuff, another one can be a pendant, another one can be a
It's
pair of
not enough
earrings.
beef in here to make well, no, if I use tiny jump rings, I can do a bracelet.
It doesn't even have to be tiny, Sonia, because you could put more than one row of them, right? So that they won't
Yeah.
flip if you put them on your
Right.
outer edges, or you could frame those, right? To make a little bit heavier rim that you can work off of. You could put them down on yet another piece of material. Those are the seeds of whatever you're going to grow.
Spot me
Ooh,
so that, am I spotted already? Where am I?
here we go. Yeah,
Mhm.
right? So as soon as you start thinking about them in a different position,
Okay,
that'd be
okay.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like the
I
alternating.
like this, yeah.
You could
And
put
you could
hinges,
solder them onto a solid cuff and maybe have a centerpiece of turquoise with those around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah, that's great.
Okay, so you've got some design homework there.
Yes. Thank you so much. This is
Sure.
great.
I
You got one. Barbara, I think we already did you for one piece already.
well, I wanted to show you the
Oh,
piece.
these are the pieces. These are the pieces, right? Yeah.
Let's just do this one.
Yep.
I don't know.
No, thank you for coming back to us with those. Okay, so draw back a little bit from your camera. I think the background is making it hard to focus. Yeah, so you've got a background, so it keeps trying to green screen us.
All right. Oh, I see. You're gonna
Although
see
we can see your
the
cute pop.
office. All right. Well, I'll send you guys a picture.
You can either do that, or if you want to pop your background off, then it'll focus on you better than it was.
Okay,
But
let's
if
see.
it's hiding
And I
your
do that with the
you have to go into your profile to clear it, which is it's different depending on what machine you're on.
I'm on a PC.
On a PC, so I think you can go into your video button and choose video settings. So where it would say stop video for you, you would go instead drop the arrow down and go to video settings.
Got it.
And then you can turn off the background, or there may be a toggled choice for blur my background that you turn off. I don't know what you've got set.
Blur. Background and effects, probably, right?
There you go.
None. Okay, now you get to see my messy office.
Oh, I was like, that's a cool background you chose instead.
Yeah, it's my office.
Okay, so now it should try to focus on you if you pull it a little bit sort of close to your face, but there we go. Now we're starting to see a starfish type shell.
Yep. And I'm trying to layer it on top of a little piece of this, ocean detritus, But what's happening is I prong set the starfish.
Yeah.
The shell's very secure, but I wanted the starfish to overlap it. and there's too much space in between the starfish and the backplate. This is just a prototype. And
Can
so,
you show it, can you show it sideways so we can see the layers?
yeah,
There we go. Okay.
how big those prongs are, it's crazy. And there's all this
Yeah.
space. So it very easily, loosens up and it's not going to work. So what I'm trying to figure out is how to better set a layered approach on like a brooch or whatever. That's what I was thinking for these, a pin.
So
What's the starfish made of?
It's enameled. It's a repoussé
Okay.
enamel.
got it. Okay. I was like, what are the fragile parts on this? So the starfish is solid. The weakest piece is the shell behind it.
Well, I don't know. The starfish is, it's like 22 gauge copper that's been repoussé
Yeah.
and then enameled. So,
Right.
So rivets will not work.
trying to figure out how to kind of lift it up, but at the same time, I don't want it just hanging up top. I wanted it to look like it was resting against the shell, almost like you would find it, in the ocean if you dropped by a beach somewhere.
Is it single-sided firing or is it front and back solder enamel?
I've got counter on it.
You do have counter. Okay. So I can tell you an approach for the next version of this that you do.
Yeah.
Which would be before you counter enamel, solder on using eutectic solder, solder on either tubes, heavy gauge tubes,
Okay.
like posts level tubes, which you can I'd probably go with tubes. You could go with wire and then you would rivet from underneath whatever you're attaching it to. But if you do tubes, you can make little screws and screw them in. Right? So then you can layer the plates, and if you make them out of extra long tubes, you can then cut the heights to fit the layer that they're on.
Right.
And it's built into your enamel piece, and it'll be much sturdier. You don't even need the prongs at that point.
Right.
You've got a connector. But with what you've got, I think I would probably be building layers of backplate where you want them, and then use tube and rivet between them. So you would put tube spacers between the layers to keep the distance balanced out.
I've done rivets with tube spacers to strengthen them before. I've done that, but soldering on the tube and then screwing it in, I've never done that. Okay.
We can do an exercise. I'll put a note down to do a tap and die demo at some point to make your own screws and
Yeah, I would love that.
tubes. Okay.
I
Tap
think-
and die.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have other ideas for her on how she can layer those things together? Fragile with glass in metal? Not that the shell being the fragile part at this point.
I wonder
I have a
if,
suggestion.
Whoop.
It's hard for,
Go ahead.
I have a suggestion. It was hard for me to see the side of it, and I'm not quite 100% sure on the layering, but it looked like there was one section you were trying to get higher. Is that correct?
Yeah, the starfish I'm trying to get higher, and so it lays on top of the coral.
It's really hard to see when you move it. If you just leave it static on
Here,
the
let me
side.
spotlight you again.
Yeah. My idea, I'm not 100% sure it would work in there, but do you know what a pedestal setting is?
No.
Or instead of having those
but
long,
I'm thinking that what she suggested with the tube would be like a pedestal.
yeah, it would be, but you could also do like a rectangle wire with the pedestal, and then like your I mean, basically, yeah, her suggestion is similar, but you can, instead of a tube, you would use rectangle wire. That's what my suggestion was.
But Jude, are you talking about creating a frame? Whereas I was just talking about posts. So is she making?
Yeah, I was thinking more of a frame. It's hard to see it, so it looks like what I was thinking would work, but I'm not 100% sure.
Something that it would rest on, that she could
Right.
control the height of the wall differently in different places.
Yeah, instead of
I
doing
think it's the
prongs,
sideways view we need, Barbara.
yeah,
Yeah.
instead of doing prongs, you could maybe do like a like a sheet prong. So instead of doing like a wire prong, like a sheet prong, so that it wouldn't be like what I see with the prongs is that it looks really exposed and it's not really like strong and sturdy on there. So like
I pulled
if
it
you-
apart, so it's already, it's fallen out of there, but I pulled it apart because I'm like, this is not working, so.
I'm gonna draw what I think you're suggesting in terms of the platform, Jude. And
Yeah.
see if this is what you actually were trying to describe to us, because then it might give everybody a little bit better connection. And I gotta switch to my other camera. So if our starfish is coming out at these different heights and levels, right? You're talking about her building a little frame that it rests on,
right.
I think, yes?
Yep.
All the way under it. And what that would allow is if she needs it higher on this side, she simply makes it get taller over there and shorter over here. Barbara, is that making sense to you?
So I would use something like metal sheet or
You could do sheet, or I like Barbara, I liked Jude's idea of a heavy rectangular wire or something like that. Doesn't have to be much.
oh, I got it.
Build you that resting position, and then you have the option off of that to put prongs attached to the frame, right?
So it's almost like resting on a wall, but I can
It's
vary.
resting on a little wall, yeah. Yeah, but the wall, you control the height
Right.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
When
would be
you
an elegant, it would sort of block the pass through and you wouldn't see the counter enamel.
Right.
So it would
Right.
And you could-
create setting.
you could file
idea.
it too if it's not all like the one level. You know, you could file
Yep.
underneath so it does look up here level, but you have control as to like, you know, the depth.
Right.
Nice.
Right. No, that makes sense to me. I get that now. Yeah. It's hard to explain sometimes, isn't it? You know,
It is. It is.
three-dimensional.
The other thing that I would think about playing around with the shell that you have behind it, or the coral rather, is that's a really great candidate for a careful drill through and use a center tube to hold the position of it while you'll also add prongs, but then you can set a flush set in the top of the tube or whatever. So it gives you something to connect to from the other pieces that are coming in above it. That's right smack
Trying
dab
to
where
bring
you,
like the precious in with the not so precious. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
right.
Even though these pieces to me are very precious.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Diamond set on top of all of that adds a little bling. Exactly.
Yeah.
Did anybody else have a project they wanted to share before I go into destroying some stuff?
Can I give Barbara one other thought?
Please.
So when I look at things as I'm walking along the shore, I see many things together. So the thought of you have your starfish, you have your coral, that space in between, maybe some other sea object should be there.
And you know I have a ton of them, right?
And me too.
yeah. No, I just was like, for me, it was like, okay, I'm gonna just plow in and try to figure this out. And I really appreciate all of you because I work by myself. I'm here by myself all the time. And so this is really helpful. And as I said, critical friends are wonderful. Thank you.
I'm going to throw one more challenge for you to think about, Barbara. When Nancy said seeing layers of things, I was like, yeah, I often see my starfish and things like that, my shells amongst kelp and other seaweed.
Right.
What kind of combination of the effect of silver as seaweed could build your frame? It doesn't have to be a straight line wall. What happens if your frame has the form, because you already do chasing and repoussé, of some structural seaweed? You know, it looks floppy, but it's actually supporting your layers.
Sure.
So
Got it. Okay, thank you. I'll come back next time and try to have it finished.
Finished. Oh my goodness. Okay, you got a whole month then.
Yeah.
Anybody else wanted to really share something that's in your pile of stuff? Okay, I also saw 2 people answered other in the things that are in their box of unfinished things. And I want to know what other. Yeah, you had an other, Paula? What do you got?
I just have to finish putting stones in and setting the, that's
Yeah.
finished stuff that I didn't finish because I did something in a class and I had another class right after it. And then, things get piled up, but
Yeah.
and I
So
have
that-
my unfinished box.
Clasp.
Clasp.
Got
Yeah.
it. So you need a something to put the box clasp on.
Yes, but this is, I have to finish my unfinished box clasp from your class.
Got it.
I gotta remember. So this is it.
Nice.
I've got the plunger on
Yep.
and here. And the garage.
Slot. Yep.
I gotta cut that slot
Yep.
and place it on the flat floor or top or whatever
yeah.
you want to call it. So
Yeah. And remember to
Mhm.
think about how you're going to connect it to whatever you're connecting it to.
yes, that's what I got to do after I
So,
finish this.
so just a thought on one of my processes. Some of you are like me, probably have piles of the unfinished things that are 2 steps from done. That last 5% is going to kill us all, right? One of the things I do in production mode, which is very different for me than experimental working in the studio, creating new designs, is I have in my case, they're little bright orange buckets that I took out of some storage container from Home Depot or something like that. And I label each of them for steps in my process. So I have a solder bucket, I have a stone setting bucket, I have a polishing bucket, and so on. And when I've got a pile of projects that just need the last bit of whatever done, I put them out in the order of the steps, and they don't all hit all the steps, but I progress them through. So then I have all my crappy, I need to get something soldered things, and I just have a really burst of big soldering, and then they move into their next slot, and then I might have to do some filing. So I've got a day of sitting in front of the TV filing things. And so if it's a pile of projects, sometimes that little bit of organization is enough to move it through. And you don't have to always move all of them together, but you know that you're getting a task out of the way and progressing things, and you can see it in the physical order of how it moves through the little buckets. So when I'm doing those days, you'll see that one of my tables gets laid out with just the pile in each category. And I work on a category for a stretch. If that helps. I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't help if you've only got one of each project type. Did everybody get a chance to
No.
answer the box quiz? If you didn't.
So, Rachel, are you saying that you're working on several things, but these 3 pieces are different, but they need the same
I'll show you.
task?
Yeah, I literally have these containers. I'll bring them over. And I have a couple containers that act as double purpose. So I literally have these containers that I've just stuck a label on. And I put them out in the order in which I generally work. And I put all of my little projects in baggies in the bin. If it overflows the bin, I know I'm in trouble. And I just work my way and move it through the steps. So it gets past the solder. That means it's going to the file and sand. It gets past the file and sand, et cetera, et cetera. Humble,
Got it.
whatever my next steps are. So just a series of things that I can do in order.
Well, everything I have fits in this little tiny box. So
Wow.
because everything else goes into to be melted.
Okay, fair. What and that's, sometimes that's what it is it's about just scrapping the things that you aren't going to get past, that we're going to do some of that destroy. We're just going to do it carefully. Did somebody else have an other category that I didn't catch besides Paula's?
Well, I think I read it too fast because I didn't see other,
Oh.
or I would have clicked it, because mine really is time, because I have a lot of family responsibilities and other things that I have to do.
Yeah.
And so I really got pulled away from my bench for quite a long time. But I did a class last year and that inspired me. And I like your idea of breaking things down into the category of what needs to be done, because I probably have 4 of those plastic boxes full of projects, and it's easy to open the box and sort of pick it up and go, what? But to get your hands on it, to say, okay, all these things I need to do some filing to or polishing or, and then that will help me, I think, categorize further. Is
Yeah.
it something I want to make? Is this, what is that next step? So I, instead of just keep picking them up out of the box and looking at them, say, okay, all of these need X, this needs that. That sounds like a really good way to be productive about it, because then I can take like 5 things that I know I need to solder something to, and that way sounds to me a way to be more time efficient, which really to me. So thanks.
So the other reason I started doing that was one of my studios was out in a garage that had no power, and so therefore no heat or anything. And so if I needed to solder, I was going to, by God, be out there for the least amount of time I needed to be out there. So what I wanted to do was organize in such a way that I could do the things I could do inside and be warm. And then and that's when I also started using muffin tins. So my soldering projects, as they're prepped, get put into a muffin tin. And then I bring the whole tray out to my soldering station, and I could go boom, 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 boom down the line, right? I'd have all the pieces. So the thing I would ask you to consider, Nancy, especially if you're doing a lot of family support things, is can you separate your containers into things that you have to be in the studio versus things that you can take with you on the road? Let's say you're visiting someone in a hospital, and I mean, they may or may not let you bring in files, but as an example, can you do design work? Can you bring some stones with you? So I have whole slews of things that I do when I'm on vacation that I don't have my full toolkit, right? So break it down. Did anybody else have an other category? No? Okay, then I think we will move on to some destruction, which is both painful and valuable. If you guys are following me on Instagram, I posted a reel today. So what I meant when I started the conversation today, saying that I'm having some discovery things as a result of this project, I was looking back through some images because I'm also in the middle of a self-awareness conversation about getting my work to be more thematic, more consistent across pieces to get into certain shows. And so I was looking back at some of the work and some of the destroyed pieces and some of the not destroyed pieces, and found what I realized was a seminal piece of my work that I hadn't realized at the time was going to be that important. I had challenged myself to do a design around the ugliest stone in my collection at the time. And there's a little reel of my evolution of thought on my Instagram from today. But basically, I did it again just as an exercise. Hey, it was a really thickly cut stone. It didn't have good sidewalls. It was this weird iron, muddy brown and sort of ochre yellow kind of combo. And I wanted to make it look better, and I wanted to do something interesting with it. And I ended up designing I needed some sparkle because this was such a solid, and it was heavy. The stone was ridiculously heavy, so I know it had a lot of iron content in it. And in looking at it, I then said, I need to sparkle it up. And that was the very first time that I went, wow, I'm going to put a faceted, bright stone with an ugly stone, with a cabochon, dull colors. Can I make it spark by bringing in a color palette that's in it already, but is translucent or transparent and brings it up? And I was like, yeah, that's nice, but it's not super exciting. And so then I built it into a third tier, and I wanted something that drew some of the weight upward on the piece instead of it was sort of just there when it was a chonky stone. And so it ended up being what I started, the very first piece of the collection I started to call diptychs and triptychs, because it was a triptych solidly attached with bars in between. And it had at the top a trillion shaped druzy, quartz druzy. And then the middle was this faceted citrine, and then the ugly rock, which wasn't ugly by the time I was done. It really fit because it had sparks of color drawn out of it. The textures were pulled apart by having the texture at the top. And it's not my favorite piece I've ever done. It was just, in retrospect, really a kickoff to some themes that would then branch for me, because I then started playing around with that idea of twos and threes and connectedness and disparate textures. And that led to two of my other collections that I didn't, until I went through this exercise, I didn't go, oh, yeah, I see their nascent roots in that. That was the first trillion druzy I use, and now I have an entire collection called the Pendulum Collection that is around these geometric shaped quartz druzys in sets that just hang down in an array around the neck. And so it did that collection. And then when I decided I wanted to start doing diptychs and triptychs in gold, I thought, well, how can I bling those up? And that brought me to my raw collection, which was very fancy, natural color, vivid druzy. When I started, it was just cube diamonds. I like rough diamonds. I don't particularly care for faceted diamonds. And so it wasn't until I was going through this exercise to prepare for today's session that I went, wow, that actually, I can see the growth in my work. I can see the transition and the split of the designs. So exercise-wise, even as you are taking things apart, really appreciate the value that you've put into them. Appreciate that your time that has gone into them, your design ideas. Don't forget to photograph them before you destroy them if they're finished. And try to date them. And when I am when I'm talking about these design concepts, they're in the context of where was I then, right? Where was I at the time? My work now is very different than my work even 5 years ago. You know, the progression is obvious to me. So keep that in mind, even as we're destroying things. So what I want to talk about on the destruction side of things is some of the tools that I use. And I'm going to spotlight myself again so that you guys can see these for real. So I brought out a bunch of the pieces that I am going to destroy, because destruction goes relatively quickly, but they each have some different scenarios in them.
But what if we like something from them?
Say again?
What if I like something from the piece that you want to destroy?
So that's what, oh, if you want to buy something that I've got out?
No, I like the feature. Why should you destroy it?
If you like the piece, but I don't,
No,
and I'm
I'm
the
not
maker.
talking about piece. I'm talking about features, something that you did.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. So what I've got
Oh.
is an array out of things that I'm just going to take apart for the sake of parts, and things that I want to keep components of, because
Okay.
absolutely you're going to have different types of destruction, right? Some of them are like smash and grab destruction, like just take them apart. Whatever you can get out of it, you get out of it. And we get sometimes nothing but metal. Other times we want to take the elements of them, like this. All the elements of it can become parts of other things. I'm going to absolutely be salvaging the pearls, and I'm going to even possibly try to salvage the bezel separately from the twig. But this is just a little too frou-frou for any collection. It was me trying to do a crossover line between my cast twigs and one of my druzy series. And it's not, I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit so you guys can see these a little bit
Yeah,
more.
I can see it well.
Right, so this is twig that's cast, bezel set, druzy, pearl. And so I don't want to destroy the parts of this. I want to salvage them carefully. Right, and I'm going to show you the different techniques I use. Whereas these, the stone cracked on one of the two earrings. So the only part that I need to retain is the good stone, except that I also still have a bezel made if I take it apart carefully, and I'm going to reuse the post component. Okay, so these I'm going to destroy a little differently than I destroy the I want all the pieces. And then there are some where I'm just trying to peel off a viable setting to separate those so that I can use it for something else, which may or may not survive the process. That's the risk on those. Some I'm just scrapping for metal. Some I'm scrapping for the stones. Okay. And some I need to be very careful of the stones. So this is an opal, which is a lot harder to take out than the others. Now this one, I'm taking it out because it actually cracked, but I'm using it as an example of how I would prep for taking something out that I'm trying to salvage the stone. So, and then others, I need to salvage the gold really carefully or something like that, right? So we'll talk about the different types of destruction. Now, some of the tools that I'll be using, one of the most useful that you need is a prong puller. And so these come in a bunch of different shapes and sizes. I usually keep a couple on hand because occasionally I'll also manage to snap a prong off of it, and they come in different thicknesses. You can modify them and file down to give yourself some leverage on some of the corners and so on. And they just act as a pry, and they have different heights to reach so that you're not scraping up the material beneath them. And I'll show you how I use those. I will also have handy a knife that I've flattened and dulled. This I need to do a little more dulling than I have, but I've ground down a junky steel knife and then polished it a bit so that I can get into things. I also use this when I'm prying open, for example, the clasp, the lift portion of the box clasp or something like that. So it's a pry bar basically. I also have burnishers of various sizes. These are a little scary when you're using them for this exercise because they will slice you open if you slip with them. They are very, very slicey, pointy topped. I personally find the ones with a slight curve to be a little bit more useful than the ones that are straight burnish, but your mileage may vary. But this one I can get kind of in things and lift a little bit if I need to. So again, it's a lot of prying action. I wish I could remember the name of this tool and or why I bought it originally, but you could also make one. You could hammer out some steel, or you could grind down a nail or something like that to do it. But again, just another means of getting into something and prying.
Those are perfect for fold forming and opening up.
These are great for fold forming. Yeah, then maybe that I might have gotten it for a Charles Luton brain class or something like that. An X-Acto, and there's two variations on the X-Acto. There's sharp as is, and then there's when you have a blade that's dyed, soften it up on your on some grinding polishing, and get it to be just a blunted version of a blade. And all it is again for getting into thin spots for prying things. This one's sharp. I haven't dulled it down because I don't have a dead blade right now. And then I'll use a variety of pliers, including, so these, I want to be more thrilled with these little plastic pliers than I am. They just don't have enough physical strength for a lot of what I want to do with them, but they are intended to get you to grip things without marring them. And so sometimes they come in handy when we're taking things apart. I'll also often have some leather scrap lying around so that I have a soft surface if I've got to be careful of my stones. And then I use pliers and snips like crazy. And it all depends on how much we're trying to salvage out of something. Any questions about any of those tools I just flashed by you?
I'm just curious, have you ever formed like a lifting tool instead of doing steel using brass? Because it's so
I have not made one. I use brass when I'm setting, but not when I'm removing. No reason not to, because brass would be even less marring than the steel. And those are nice and easy to make your own out of rods. So yeah, go for it. Like a version of this in bronze or brass rather would be fabulous. Right. And it's one of those ones where I almost want a little like angle or lift that I like a pie server kind of get in there and lift kind of thing. But it's going to be Some of these are tools that you can buy and some of them are tools that you make for yourself. So I'm going to do some of the easiest ones first. And when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to describe my exercise to you, I was taking apart some other things before I got to the session. It's kind of like when you watch a professional chef take a bird apart. Like that's what we're going for, is which parts do we need to take apart neatly and which parts just remain with the carcass, right? So in this case, I'm going to assess, and I know that one of my stones is cracked, so it's going to be no good by the time I'm done. Or I'll have to file it down, but this is a pretty ugly crack and chip. And then I know that I can reuse these posts in this collection that I do. So the first thing I'm going to do in this case is snip my connecting jump ring and set aside the wings of this bird. I'm going to just cut them off, knowing that my jump ring is going to be actual scrap metal, but I have those that I can use on a subsequent pair of earrings because they're a matched set. So boom, I've got my two usable later pieces.
What are the
Then
birds?
I got to decide. So let's do the easy one first, which is the cracked stone. I'm not going to, this bezel is going to be nothing for me. So I don't really need to salvage it because I won't have a stone to put in it unless you're using really well calibrated stones. But this is a random one. So I'm going to use this device and basically just go around and pry up a lot of the bezel edge and lift it back. And because I'm not trying to salvage anything material-wise other than have the silver be recyclable, I can just go through pretty quickly and rough flip it. And you'll see, again, I can find there might be one spot that it's easier to pull with a different gap in there. It's really about having the leverage. This is the right fulcrum for the job. So if you had physics and they talk to you about using a log to lift something, this is all we're doing here, is lifting the metal. Now, this is going to be harder if you're working with gold, or at least low carat and mid carat gold, because it's going to be a harder pry. This is either fine or sterling silver, I would bet, given that it's got tarnished, probably sterling. So it's going to mangle the edge on this. On gold, it may be a little more leverage that you need to get into the spot you need. And at some point, you'll get to a point where either you can pull the stone out directly or you can snip away the excess material to open it up. So in this case, I've got it wide open. I could probably pop it out there, but I'm going to just put a little snip and start peeling off some of that metal by force until I can get the stone pieces out. Now, if I were a gem cutter, I might find some value to those two little pieces. Or if I want to do some kind of kintsugi effect and weld them back together with some gold in between them, bond them, and make another stone out of it, I could. So your choice, whether you want to hang on to it or not. In my case, I'll probably end up tossing those stone pieces. And now this one, if I'm careful about it, I can get it up and have the stone out of the piece and have it hanging out with its bezel in case I should need this to append to solder onto something else. I could just leave it this way, and I might until I have a project for it, and then I'd pull the stone or decide to work with one of the stone protecting mechanisms. I might be able to get in quickly enough. Let's say, you know, I have a pendant and I want to hang it off of the bottom of it. I may be able to get a quick enough solder on a jump ring if I protect this in some way. We're going to talk about how to do that, a few different variations on that too. So for now, I can leave this as is, or I can just do a much more careful and slow prying up of the prongs. And this is where I would probably, with this kind of a serrated bezel, I'd probably come in with my blunted X-Acto, which is a thin insert, and try to lift the individual teeth until I have it enough that I can pull the stone, if I wanted to pull the stone. But again, right now, I think I'll probably leave this as a component that I can add to something else down the road. So that's one chicken taken apart, and I've got a pair of earring posts. And I've got a broken stone and I've got a component for later use. Questions on any of that? Okay,
You said birds. Where are the birds?
birds. Oh, and I'm talking about like when you
Two
watch
birds
the
with one
show
stone.
and they slice up a whole chicken.
Oh.
They take a chicken apart and they, you have to use the sharp knife and you cut off, first you cut off the legs and then you cut off the wings and then you like, so you're doing a very careful separation of everything.
Oh,
It was my
oh.
metaphor for how we're taking things apart.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to cook, so that's why I'm
Okay, well, I don't know how to do that to a chicken well, but I have seen it on TV enough times that it was the analogy I had. So the only difference when I'm working with, say, an opal or something that I want to salvage out of the stone is I'll cut a perimeter of blue painter's tape, not a perimeter, an interior of painter's tape. And I will try to use the least force I can to lift the prongs. So again, I might move on to starting with just a little pry, or I might see if I can get a small pair of pliers. If I can, in this case, it's a very toothy prong. I might be able to get the pliers to lift them up by pulling at them, like pivoting against the prong push down that I would normally do. I don't think those are going to get in there because this is too tiny. Let's see if I have any better pliers for this exercise. No, I think I'm going to go back to using the knife. So in this case, it's just wiggling it under there and lifting, wiggling it under there and lifting. And we're trying to not put any metal down onto the stone, the fragile stone. So like malachite, opal, maybe moonstone, anything that you don't want to, it doesn't hurt to put the tape down on everything. So this is going to be a much slower process than the other one because I'm trying to have the care to actually move these prongs out of the way so I can reuse this stone and maybe even the bezel. It's not giving in quite enough.
And what was the reason you didn't like this one?
Oh, this is the opal under it is actually broken.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm doing this as an exercise to show you the sort of
Right.
different pace that I would take going through little guys, and this thinned out knife can get in some of these. And then again, it's a gentle lift. You may have to do it in a few stages. But you're getting under there, getting a little leverage, and the tape is helping to protect the stone itself. And once they start popping up, it becomes a lot easier. You don't have to necessarily, depending on the shape of the stone, you don't necessarily have to get all of the prongs up in order to get the stone out. So you can see I'm just doing this little push in, lift. And once I get the first few in, I've got a little spot that I can work my way into to go up and around. And check that your tape hasn't slid on you. It might move around a little bit because it's just a light protection to the stone. And you won't always want to get a whole bunch of prongs at once. You can probably do a few at a time. Get in there and lift. And you have to be careful not to slide whatever device you're using down into the side so far that you start pushing and putting force against the far wall, because then your stone may fracture simply because you're pushing at it. There's also a pair of pliers that I couldn't find mine called prong lifter pliers, which allow you to sort of claw grip the thing, like it'll grip a prong and then you peel back. And I have no idea where my pair is, so I couldn't show those today. I'm betting I packed them up for something and haven't unpacked that box. Right, so at this point, I've got prongs mostly lifted a little bit. And now I can either grab them individually and get a little more pulled back. With the delicate prongs, I got to be careful not to overbend them because, of course, they will be work hardened a little bit. So one of the risks is that they'll break off as I do this exercise. And I'm just straightening them out. You can also put tape on your pliers so that if you are using soft metal, you can avoid scraping up the bezel if you're trying to salvage it. I find the corner ones are often the hardest. Okay, and then I'm about at the point where I want to see if I can tap it out, or I'm gonna get my wax on a stick. I just use a little bit of Wolf's sticky wax. Let's see if I can pull it out. It's coming out a little bit, but there's still some catch points. You can, of course, if you don't need to save anything, just smash stuff with a hammer. We all have hammers. But, you know, this is a little more elegant and may salvage some of your materials. So I tend to make the mistake of getting impatient when I get to this stage, because I want to just get in there, get under there and just lift, because it's so close to coming out. But oftentimes that'll end up cracking the stone. So I'm now at a point where I can possibly get a little leverage under the stone completely with my small pokey curved burnisher. And then I can get a full leverage underneath and pull that stone out. So there I would have my theoretically whole stone, except that it had cracked before I got there, peeling that out. Now, this bezel, if I'm salvaging that stone and it's something wrong with the ring, then I'm going to also want to take the step of pulling this off by unsoldering it. And so we're going to do that with a couple of them. So I've got a pile that we're going to unsolder. And let's go to one of these that I said I wanted to keep the components more consequentially maintaining their integrity. So in this one, I have a couple of choices. I can carefully, with the finest saw blade I have, saw that off to get the twig. I can also cut it off with shears if I can get in there, but that risks leaving a lot behind. Or I can unsolder them. And if I'm going to unsolder them, I need the stone out in order to do that. So in this case, I'm going to give up. I'm going to salvage my little nut for the earrings. I'm going to give up on this ear wire because it's not worth salvaging. It's just scrap metal as far as I'm concerned. I am going to take off the pearl, which I will rewire on whatever I have available. I'm going to probably leave it on there until such time as I'm ready to do so, just like I did with the stone. And then I'm going to carefully peel up these prongs.
And this is because you don't like, why are you doing the destroying in this one? You don't
Because
like,
it's not stylistically, this one doesn't fit my work. It didn't fit my work when I made it, and it definitely doesn't fit my work today. But these stones, the other reason I'm doing it is these blue stones, I cannot get right now. I haven't been able to get them for 3 years. My the supply has dried up because of COVID. And so the blue stones in particular are very coveted in one of my other collections. So they're going to get new life. Pardon?
What kind of stone is it?
It's one of the few dyed stones I use. It is a dyed quartz druzy, and they come in blues, yellows, and greens. But most of the people who dye quartz do such a terrible job that it looks like bad plastic or candy stones. And so I particularly like this vendor's stones, and he can't get them. So much so that whenever I send friends to see him when they're at shows that I can't get to, he's like, yeah, I know what Rachel wants. Tell her I can't get them yet. I still can't get them. So I don't know if I'll ever get more of this collection, which will be a darn shame because these blues in particular sell like crazy. So this is a little trickier to get in here because at the top, I don't have the angle that this tool will give me without pushing up heavily against the stone. So I got to be a little more careful, and I may want to switch tools. Because it's quartz druzy, I got to be especially careful not to push down on the stone. So what I'm trying to do is use the other prong as what I'm pushing against to get up there. And then it just leaves the last two for me to get a funky angle for. But this is a big risk to chipping the druzy. get some leverage that's against another problem. Okay, so the one in the corner is going to give me the most grief. My bigger lifters will do it. So this is why I have an array of tools out, is whatever works on one, doesn't work on one, another tool may pick up the slack for just a specific piece of it. And now I'm pretty darn close. More lift over there. There. Nope. Wait, something's still holding this guy. It'll also teach you how snugly your stones have been fitting in your bezels when you start doing this. Still got a little bit at the front holding this in place. You'll see imperfections in your original construction as you're going through. You'll see things that you would do differently now, or finishing that you should have done. Careful, this is hitting the edge of the stone. There we go. All right, so we now have the bezel, the stone, the pearl that we took apart, and we're going to take that twig off of there. And at no point do I ever assume I'm going to save everything when I'm doing this. I, in fact, go in with the opposite thought. I go in thinking I'm likely to destroy everything, and all I can do is hope that I get some good work out of this, some good material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to the soldering station, and we're going to do some careful destruction using the torch. And the idea of this type of destruction is salvage, not actual destroying of the work, right? So what our goal is to take it apart with minimal impact. And for this, I'm going to have a couple of various pairs of pliers handy. I'm going to use my third hand a lot. I've got to remember to turn on my torch before we do anything else, because it's going to be a lot easier to make fire if I do. All right, and so this is one of those art forms that is great practice for repair work, or for when you get partway through a project and you don't like the way that you got something aligned or what have you, is practicing how to do this sort of delicate amount of fire to grab. And the real thing you have to get used to is not going in for the kill too quickly. We need the solder flowing before we touch it with the steel, because as soon as I start connecting it to steel, steel steals the heat, right? It's gonna cool everything off, and as soon as I start pulling, so I can't hang out here. And worse, not only does it steal the heat, but eventually it gets so hot that it's going to collapse and melt things, right? The steel is going to concentrate our heat after a while, and we would crush what we're trying to salvage. So my goal on this one, even though I don't actually have the working stone to replace, is that I'm going to pull these apart and save both the ring band and the bezel off of it.
Rachel,
So-
I got a quick question.
Sure, yep.
What would you do differently if one of the pieces you're pulling off is argentium?
I don't work with argentium, so I'm not sure that other than knowing intellectually that you have to be much more careful about it getting too brittle, although I hear that the recent configuration of argentium isn't as bad. It's really about as fast as you can get in and out, whether it's the argentium or this, but argentium is a lot more likely to crack on you, and don't quench when you put this much heat on it at the end, so let it cool
What
down.
I know is you can't pull on it when it's hot, it just breaks.
Well, so then you might have to satisfy yourself with which part you're gonna save. So let's say that the important part for me if this ring were argentium and I cared most about the bezel, I might work this way
Right.
and have a, say, a titanium pick and try to just hold it down, or one of those, I can't remember what they're called, the little triangle duckbill things that you can use to put weight down on something. I know Lion's Punch does a few, there's a bunch of different
Those
models.
spiders, the steels or spiders, yeah.
Yeah, spiders, things like that would work. And so what you're doing then is you're focusing your heat on the pull away, the thing that you don't care if it cracks on you.
Yeah.
Trying to leave the least heat and the least pressure on the thing that you do want to retain.
Right.
But
Good
again,
point.
I always go into these exercises knowing that I'm not always gonna salvage what I hope to salvage.
And before you light the torch, would you protect that? I personally would use denatured alcohol and boric and
Yeah,
put
if
that
you're gonna,
on.
yeah, it's not a bad call. Or Prips flux, which is what I usually have. This is all scrap for me for real right now, because I'm not actually trying to salvage this, but yeah, you might want to do your fluxing and everything. What you really want is in and out. So the reason I don't tend to do that unless I'm working on, say, a large hollow form that I'm gonna keep the hollow form and I'm just peeling off a bezel that went awry. Is that I'm really, when I say I'm going in fast, I'm going in fast. I want to heat it hot quickly so that I get it flowing quickly, so it's not gonna be at high risk of additional fire scale. So I'm going fairly decent torch and in as quickly as I can, knowing that my focus is right where I want to separate things. And I'm holding my tweezers at the ready, but not actually. There we go. Not actually clamping anything until I'm ready to move it. And I'm watching for the gleam of the solder underneath. And then pulling as soon as I see it. It's gotta be instant, because this was also put down to its base with medium solder. And therefore it was a risk of it was that it might go off of its back plate while I was doing that. But that's all I'm gonna do for that separation. I've now got my bezel to reclaim to go with that stone, theoretically, that's if it were not broken. I would not quench it if I was working argentium. I would let it cool naturally. I'm gonna do a couple of those to show you that again, because it goes quickly. So this one totally mangled in order to get the stone out. So I'm not trying to salvage that. I'm just trying to separate it. So I have the ring band beneath it. But again, I'm not counting on the fact that it may split at its seam, which is right under the bezel in this one. And I do these quick checks to like test and see if I can pull it, but then I move the steel out of the way as quickly as I can. And in this case, oh, it did come off whole. Sometimes what will happen is you'll break off a piece of the wall. But otherwise it's just get in and out as quickly as you can. Okay, so here is our riskiest one, because this is fancy bezel. It's a heavyweight piece, so that this is going to be fighting the heat. I may have an easier time of it if I pull the jump ring off the top when I get the chance, because I have a feeling it's going to want to fall off anyhow, since that was probably done also with a medium solder. And it may melt before I get the opportunity to anyhow. So I'm doing a little bit in this case, I'm doing a little bit of flick past the seam so that I'm not actually doing a lot on my back plate. Yep, see, there we go. We got it off all in one piece, but that one fell off before I got there. So now I've got that piece separated. And the nice thing is I even salvaged the bezel in a reusable way. I'm gonna have to do a little filing off of the end of it, just to clean up where I connected it to the twig, but it didn't lose its bottom jump ring. So I've got another component because I have the stone for that still. Questions about those activities? You will mess stuff up. If you haven't been doing this kind of exercise, you will mess them up a lot. It'll take time to get that fast bird in and out, like watch for the flash. You all know what I mean when I'm talking about watching the flash, or do I need to talk a little bit about that?
It's when the solder is letting go. It's hot enough
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
it's
it's
basically
specific.
melted.
It's that moment of flow. It's the moment at flow. When I'm describing it when it's going down for a big bezel, I describe it as the sunrise effect. If you've ever been out on a beach or something right at sunrise and it's just before the sun hits, there's this flash of color light that goes across at the horizon, right? We're looking for that flash. And that flash, if you are not already seeing that in your solder practice, start watching for it because it's very, very telling. It is the moment that is most critical to your solder to either take heat away or put an action to the metal, drop something in place, move something. And so when you start looking at repairs and taking things apart, again, they go hand in hand. It's about engaging your hindbrain to know even faster. So like it tells your hands before you could even articulate that the solder is flowing. And that's where you'll see me position things and then I'll go, that's not quite right. Excuse me, that's not quite right. I'll be watching for that flash point again. And there's an exactly perfect time when you could take a little pair of tweezers or a little prod and just go and touch it enough to slide it right back into place. That is a skill that only comes with time and practice. And it's about getting your brain to stop panicking about soldering and look at the holistic solder and just realize that moment of flash. It is also the reason that if you are fairly new to your soldering work, I encourage working in sterling rather than in fine or argentium silver. Because even though they have higher melt points than sterling does, they also have a skin flash that looks very similar to, oh my God, my piece is melting. And so it's hard to distinguish from the solder flash. When you're working with sterling, the sterling itself will usually oxidize enough that you can actually identify the flow line more easily, right? But if you're working, especially with, it really happens with fine silver. Fine silver gets a coating, a skin of almost liquid metal long before it's actually going to melt, but it looks like it blurs in with the flash of solder. I wish that even my good camera won't really be able to get you that. I've never gotten close enough to recording it, but keep an eye on your next few solders if you're not quite connecting with what I'm saying and see if you can vibe on that flash. Questions? Okay. So that was some destruction. Let's do some creation. Make sure I had all of the things that I wanted to cover in that. So we talked about identifying the parts on destroying. We talked about identifying the parts we want to keep, components, stones, etc. Talking about taking apart like a bird. Pin backs is another thing that I'll often like. Pin backs is one of the big repairs, having to take apart one piece of the pin back and then put a new one on. Always look for your least destructive method first, right? Whether that is sawing or what have you, or snipping. Sometimes it's just a good pair of snips and throw away whatever you had to snip and file down the rest of it. The tools we talked about, good quality flush cutters or snips, soldering tools, torch, tweezers, pick, prong lifters, a dull knife, prong lifting pliers, which is the ones that I can't find for the life of me, fine saw blades. Remember to use plenty of lubrication, especially on the fine saw blades. Painter's tape, leather scraps, those are the things we were talking about. And then we've got, we'll do some repair next time. I think we'll skip that and talk about redesign because I want to do a little creating before the day ends so that you guys can get a sense of what I think about when I am trying to break one of those boundaries of, hey, I didn't get where I wanted to go with the design. So in my pile of many things, other stories out of the way. In my pile of many things, I have a lovely druzy from one of my favorite stone cutters, Joe Jelks of Horizon Lap. This is not actually on here, it's just some wax that was on there. So it's this gorgeous, he does these wonderful combination polished and open druzes that I love that go into a lot of my stones. So I really love this shape. It was unusual. And it's what I use those stones for most of all is something called my chained one of a kind collection, which is, as it sounds, each necklace is unique. And it's driven by the patterns in the stone themselves. And this is one of my favorite collections to work on, but I have to sort of pace myself because it's really easy to make lots of them and they don't sell quickly because they're not inexpensive. But the theme of it is that I find the stone that I really like as a large statement center stone, and then something that speaks to me about the shapes that are in it. So usually it's going to be something in the druzy forms the shapes that I put within the links of the chain. And I should have brought out one that I have finished. Let me see if I have a couple of pictures that I can show you all of the chained one of a kind collection. Bear with me a sec. I'm calling it Chained After Hours now. I should be giving you the proper name. So I think this may have been one of my earliest. Where's my share screen? Come on, share screen. Boy, it really does not like to pop up my choices when I am when I'm using chat too. Okay, so this is one of my earliest pieces. And this was the stone that drove me nuts. I'll bring it up to full size. I just absolutely adored this stone, also a Joe Jelks piece. And I wanted to do this combination bezel, a heavyweight bezel with some prong additions because you have to be very careful about any open-edged druzy that you're not chipping it. And I really loved the dots within it of the other minerals that come through. And I liked its translucent nature. And I wanted to repeat the pattern. So this chained collection is all about repeating the pattern, which is that I wanted these shapes to come back in both the decorative elements and in the shape of my abstract links. So this is actually one of the simpler designs in this collection. I also am always cognizant of people who have challenges putting necklaces on. And so this is actually a double-sided clasp, a lefty or righty, and it's just a tension push past this. So you slide the link off or you slide the link off on that side. It also means that somebody could swap out the chain for another. But thematically, this is the concept behind any of my Chained After Dark collection. Let me go back to others in that series. So you'll see that they all, again, start life with what's going on in the shape of the stone. And then I look for interesting ways to set things. So this one's one of my favorites in terms of settings. It's a partial thick-walled bezel. And then rather than having prongs, I reiterated the theme. And it sort of felt iceberg-like to me, that there's some stuff going on underneath and some stuff going on over. So this is a wire loop that I built into the edge of the prong wall. If we could see the other side of it, you would see naked stone resting along this line here. And again, then I want that theme to recur. And I tend to like either alternating or offset plain negative space with some of the more detailed links. So this one, again, just reiterates that pattern. It's reflected in the positive and the negative, and it holds this beautiful stone that he cut. I usually do these with some kind of toggle clasp, but this was one of my early ones because I ended up making more of my toggles down the road. But thematically, they get more and more complex as they go. Some of them have a lot of detail, and some of them have less. They're usually a progression of large to small chains to make it comfortable, and they're almost always connected with just plain jump ring connectors between. It's usually 2 sideways jump rings and 1 center jump ring. So the stone that I have now, I'll show you what. I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions about those before I pop off of screen back to the video? So, this stone is definitely calling to me to be one of that series. And where it got stuck in my pile was I have this, and I have to put this out on the neck ring. Let me back out a little bit so you guys can see the whole shebang. So it got stuck with the boring bezel, which is too lightweight for the stone. And then the pokey bits that I was really fascinated by in my links that I'm not sure will work for what I want, because people may not want to wear pokey bits. So I think my original layout went something along the lines of this. And it felt a little bat wing. It wasn't quite what I was hoping for. And I don't remember, I think I must have been planning on doing it something like this. More tape. So something along the lines of that kind of shape. Oh, I've got the wrong size pieces. That's part of why it's causing me problems. Those guys, the big ones come up front.
That's a
And
beautiful
as you can see,
design.
there's some challenges as it starts to hit the neckline, because we need it to not be poking up and out like it's going to stab them in their ear, right? This stuff will get a little too stabby right now. So a couple of challenges left this in my pile, in my box. One is this straight up and down line, which doesn't look very straight when I've got it at that angle, but this was, when I was designing it, it was really just sort of pointing down. Not as exciting as the stone merits. I'm not enamored of the very thin basic wall. It didn't do enough for the stone. It didn't pop the stone in any way. And as much as I love the pokey bits, I'm not sure I can make them in such a way that they won't stab my customer, which is, believe it or not, one of the least of my worries. It should be more of a worry than it is. So now what I'm trying to figure out is what excites me about the idea of these shapes. And some of that is about playing with how they come out. I don't yet want to cut these off because I could just go straight to getting rid of the pokey bits. But I really find something exciting about this point at which they connect and create the secondary shape, right? So there's something really fascinating to me about that design element, because it kind of brings something in of the original angle of the piece. So what I think I need to do is consider not connecting them just at a single link at each point as I had originally planned, but creating a double connection point. So there's actually protection from the pokey bits and flexion that handles things like how is it going to bend over the shoulder, right? The other thing that is challenging to me is I'm not terribly excited by this direction of the piece. I think there are more interesting things that I can do. Like as soon as I start to curve the necklace around and then it comes in at a different point, it suddenly becomes far more interesting up front, right? So I need to decide some of my center elements. What am I going to do with them? And what is my intent? How is it going to be worn? How is it going to be balanced on the body? Because it could be overweighted really easily. And what am I using for connection points? I like this particular connection to have very fluid connectivity. I don't like to, like I could put bars between and lock the stone to the piece over here, but that's too stiff for this collection. So these are some of the things I'm contemplating as I go into design mode. Any questions or thoughts on that?
I had a thought. I really like the first formulation before you kind of move things around here really had a, you don't have to move them back, but I really got a stained glass sort of idea,
Mm,
you know, from I really love the shapes of the wires. And
yeah.
yeah, just like what you're doing now, and the negative space that may have nothing in the center, really reminds me of the shape of the stone.
Yeah,
So I kind of
Yeah.
like that. And it, at a point where it doesn't really matter, whether you move things up and down like you just did a minute ago.
Yep.
I like both of them, but I like the idea that the wire, has a design and a shape, as you're putting them together.
Mhm.
And it's random and I like it. Yeah.
So the other thing that appealed to me about it was this idea of them crossing over
Right.
and creating a point. So it's whether I would trim them out at the bottom and they would literally be just connected there, or whether I would retain the extension portions of it.
I
Right?
I think the stone has so much oomph that the wires are too skinny and for my I think they're too skinny.
So on the weight relative to the stone,
Yeah.
so here's a thing that may change your mind about that. Let me put a piece of, so what I'm headed towards is, instead of making the wires heavier, I'm thinking of making the bezel a heavier one along the bottom edges, and then clearing it here. So there isn't going to be bezel up top. The bezel would only come much like that very first moon-shaped piece I
Oh,
showed,
yes, yeah.
right? Which
Okay.
lightens up the top of the stone and flows it more into that collection. So
True.
I use, for these, I use 13 gauge wire generally. Do
Okay.
you think that would change your mind about it if there's more like silver to silver connection?
Yeah, because like I said, the stone has so much, I don't know, oomph is what I think. But
Yep.
what you're saying, you're gonna let the energy out. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, let it breathe up here. So
Uh-huh.
here's literally what, I erased it when I was doing some work to polish it up. But here's literally the first thing I did when I started saying, before I had realized I need a heavier bezel, is I went, oh, let me follow the line of the druzy and at least cut away. This is a terrible pen. Give me a moment. At least cut away all of this material so that there's a pass through. Oh, you can see it on this side where I marked it, right? So that would all get cut away. In fact, I have no aversion to cutting it away right now for the sake of this exercise, because I am confident I'm not using this bezel. So I'll just snip some out so you guys can see how it'll lighten it. And sometimes it's these really small, not necessarily simple, but small changes to the construction that can really emphasize or de-emphasize a feature of what you're working on. So assume that I will actually follow the line of the stone and not just this rough cut that I've done. But as soon as we do that, you see it starts to lighten up the top. I don't know if my light is glaring too much for you guys to see that, but there we go. So as soon as we have that pass through up to the top, does that change your take on the visual?
Oh, yeah,
Right?
of course. Yeah.
That's a little bit of sawing and filing, right? And then we suddenly have magically changed what was a very boxy, enclosed looking stone into something that now has movement up towards the design.
Are you gonna leave it the same gauge? What gauge?
No,
is
I
it?
definitely know that I want heavier gauge at least
Okay.
here.
What gauge is that you have used there?
Oh, I think this is probably like 22 gauge. This is so old. I was doing most of my basic bezels in 22 gauge sterling at the time.
Yeah.
And really this stone merits something much more
Oh my
consequential,
God, yeah, it's
right?
beautiful.
And I may do a single gold tipped prong finding its way down the front, or I may put gold tip prongs here and here, something like that, to give a little bit of extra splash. The other thing that I was thinking I wanted to do is I probably want to cut away material, but I'm iffy on that because, as you can see, it's so transparent that it'll pick up whatever they're wearing.
Ah,
So
true.
put it on the fence.
Yeah.
What I have yet to do is figure out whether it'll look spectacular with gold backing, in which case I might Kimboo the back of the bezel before I set the stone. I don't know that I have a piece of gold easily handy to show that, but let me see. Maybe. Let's see what we got. So possibly backing it with gold, but that may detract from the actual textural material. I can't decide. Right, so these are the kinds of things that I go through, and I live with the piece and with the ideas for a while before really committing to a design, unless I'm like lightning bolt level inspired. So, any questions about those kinds of design exercises? Because my next effort is to really do a little more sketching, do a little bit more materials gathering to see what I like for thicknesses, whether I'm going to put any kinds of prongs and that sort of thing, and come up with how I'm going to manage those connectors. But I'm going to doodle a lot around the position of everything. Questions?
Do you always design that way?
In iterative cycles, you mean?
Like, you had a sketch beforehand, right?
No,
Before you, no?
no,
Okay.
I did not on this one. There are some designs that I do that so I have sketchbooks and I sketch constantly. I doodle on napkins, I doodle on yellow pads. I can't find the yellow pads I like anymore. I doodle on white lined pads and transfer sketches into books. Especially when I'm working on a new collection or series, I will do dozens and dozens of variant drawings of things, but they're usually, they're not like John's drawings. They're just pen and ink mock-ups, maybe a little shadowing, maybe a little texturing to show that I want to do a specific layering on it. And I'll make notes about the stones I want to use and where I want gold or silver or what have you. If I'm going to do reticulation, I might draw in some of the reticulation lines. But those are not, it's rare that I have sketched a full design before I have started working on a piece. But that's my approach because I am much more of a 3D thinker than I am a 2D thinker. So I can craft what I'm wanting rather than I'll get frustrated by it if I have to put it down on paper. So your mileage may vary. Some people like sketch top to toe, put measurements, put scale, everything. If I'm doing a custom piece, I'm more inclined to do sketches for the customer so that they can see where my brain is going with it, because it's not always, especially non-jewelry people can't always understand when I say, well, and then we'll have this kind of a bezel and that kind of a thing. But yeah, and sometimes designs come out because I pick up a stone and I build something around it, like just whole hog formed in my brain.
Like this piece right now, that you just say, oh, I like the shape, I'm just going to continue the shape in a different material, or
Yeah.
I mean,
This
how was your
collection-
approach?
This collection
Like,
is always about, ooh, cool stone. I'm buying that stone. And then I'm making something that matches the pattern. So the whole series is about, here is the cool stone. All I'm doing is building a way for you to hang it around your neck. Right? Other collections, it's more techno-functional, like the large hollow form pieces that you've seen when you were in hollow forms class. Those I have to actually think about the mechanics of how the units will fit together. Those are going to have more sketches. Like one of the ones on my bench is this sketch, which I've done full out scale drawing of what I'm doing. And this one, this is stuck on materials and possibly a little redesign because I'm not thrilled at how they're pivoting. But that's because I'm looking for a very specific effect with it, because it's got that hollow form collection is often designed to be reversible. And so it takes a little more draw it out to make sure it'll work before you start on it. Oh, Jude, if you're talking to us, you're on mute. Oh, maybe she's not talking to us. Okay. Any other questions on that design process?
But
Well,
I
it's a
I
beautiful
find that really
design.
interesting because I came into metal by doing metal.
Yeah.
And then I started going to gem shows. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty stone. Oh, that's a pretty stone. And now I'm faced with this collection of stones that I have to figure out what I'm going to do with them, because when I die, they're going to send it into a landfill or something,
There-
So it's
There's
like,
definitely better things to do than send them to a landfill, not the least of which is donate them to a craft school.
oh,
so
no,
that
no,
students-
no, no, I know. No, I've got a few schools around here, but you
Okay.
know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
kind of like-
And part of what I'd encourage you to get you all to do is not bog yourself down with doing nothing but what's in the box, but also use this as an opportunity to see your materials, your supplies that you've been sitting on differently. So especially if you find a design that's not quite working for you, go pull out that pile of stones and go, hey, what would happen if I put in this stone I've been hoarding for 13 years? And you'll get some intriguing results.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, playtime is good. Don't just work on clearing your box. Give yourself freedom. In fact, demand that a portion of your practice is about playtime and new design ideas. So make it something beautiful if it called to you in the first place. I have way more stones than I'll ever use too, but I'm trying to be more judicious about what I pick because I know it goes thematically with the kinds of styles I'm using these days.
Yeah, yeah. I would always feel like, oh, I'm not good enough to do that. I'm not good enough to do that. And so
Okay. I don't know if I gave this speech on day one. Absolutely get yourselves some hardbound drawing paper quality or graph paper, if you prefer graph paper, sketchbooks, and put your sketches, rough or no, in the books and put at least the month and year on the page. Always be designing ahead of your current skill set, because then 6 months from now, you'll go in and you'll be like, oh, shit, I know how to do that. Like, oh, I could have done that 2 weeks ago, right? Because if you're only designing to your current abilities, you're never going to progress. You're never going to have goals to hit or classes that you then take so that you can accomplish that skill. That's that bucket we talked about skills or technical challenges, right?
yeah,
Figure out the hurdle you need to get yourself past. So don't say, oh, I could never do that. Say, I can't do it yet. It's a
right.
very different mindset. And the drawings, like you go back and you'll look in your old sketchbook 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, and you'll go, oh, I remember that idea. I really liked that idea. And then you'll re-sketch with your current mindset and your current skill set.
Yeah.
So
I
look
take
forward.
my video off just because my bandwidth's not great. So
No, that's okay. Any other questions on this next design step that I'm going to take? Okay, I am likely to do some of the components of this between now and next session. And then probably leave it part way complete so that you guys can see some of the soldering exercises and so on. But mostly my decisions are around how am I angling that stone and then how am I making the components connect so that it still fits nicely over the neck and doesn't stab my customer. Pretty
I'll
basic.
pop in to say, when you moved the triangle that was in like place 2 on the neck on the
Yep.
what would be my left side, and you moved it down beside the stone instead of
Yep.
it being, I really like that. I like the asymmetrical.
Me too.
It brought, I want to say, an interesting balance somehow to have the triangle on the other side and then that. Connecting, I don't know if you would do a tube so that you could slide it through or, but I
Ooh.
like that position.
That could
And
be the hinge on
I totally hear you when you say about the back, you didn't want to make it too open because what can be seen through it. But if you did some kind of piercing that was subtle,
Yeah.
then that might actually be interesting. What happens when you look through that stone, you know, on the cloth. So
Yeah, this is a kind of series that I would do a lot of piercing usually. That first moonstone, I mean, the first moon shaped piece was pierced out so that the dots would show. This stone is going to fight me on backing, I think, and it's going to be one of the challenges. But yeah, the thing that got this to the top of the queue for me for pulling out of the box for redesign was as soon as I did that angle the first time, I went, oh. Now it's not just a stone hanging from a chain I've made. Now it is a statement about the stone, and it's that ring, that line along the side is going to hold it. It's gonna present like it's literally lifting the stone. So that was what made me
Really
pick this
nice.
one of the 30 some odd projects that I've got to choose from out here on the bench. So I want you guys to take this kind of work back to your own bench if you're playing along at home, and they're not all going to come out like that, right? Some of them you'll progress a step of idea. You might pull some stones and go, oh, well, what happens if I combine this? Or do the thing that we had Sonia do, which is rotate some pieces, change the angles, change the directionality. Give yourself time to live with the piece, appreciating it all over again for why it got there in the first place. Not just for, we talked a lot about the why it landed in the box. Now let's talk about why it started life, right? Think about what captivated you in the piece. It will also help you with some of the on the fence items of destroy or keep or redesign. And I'll also tell you, you have permission, give yourself permission to keep a piece because it's important to where you were then. I'll pull out one that went into my fix it instead of take the material away. So this is a design that is nothing like anything I make anymore. And it was barely even something I would make. And man, is the chain bad. Like the solder joins on this are bad. But this is 15, 20 years ago for me, 15, 18 years ago, maybe. And so it's important to me because I have a piece that I can keep. I'll never sell it. It's not something that's worthy of being one of the ones that I put out for customers at this point. But it's a piece that shows, again, some of my origin story, right? It's got texture, it's got hammer texture, it's got negative space, it's got some geometrics, it's got that using the stone to tell me where the shapes go. So this is another one of those pieces that advises me both on how far I've come and how much of me has been in my work all along. Because early in my career, I was like, I'm just making stuff because it's the next design. Especially when I started teaching, I was designing things not for my interests, but for what my students wanted to learn. And that was a bad place to get into because it was not my style at all. It was technique based. So hang on to the pieces you need to hang on to as much as be ready to destroy them if they aren't relevant or important to your history. So
can we see that one closer?
sure, let me
April? Yeah.
put it on a mandrel for us. I'm gonna put it on a
Rachel, you're making me laugh. My sister was wearing a ring the other day where I was at a funeral, and I said, that is a really cool ring.
yeah.
She goes, numbnuts, you made it.
Nice.
I did.
Nice. That's great. Let me get in a little closer. So this was one that I did to make a design around. This is another one of the started life because I was teaching. It's a tab setting, how to make a setting that you don't have to solder if you don't want to. And it's a technique that I teach in my unusual stone setting class. But I hate anything that I can't solder closed.
Hey,
Say
how you
again?
doing?
What was that, Deborah?
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have had my speaker on.
Oh, no worries. But it has my thematic hammer texture that would be in a lot of my work since then. It has my love of creating custom chains, which is one of the most meditative things on the planet. So there's, again, a lot of my history in this piece. And for where I was, this was really advanced when I was making it for me. So, yeah.
Oh.
Any
One
last?
question.
Yep.
What do you mean by my thematic texture?
So I do a little bit of a backstory. I've told you guys I started my jewelry career when I was 8. But I was doing mostly enamel at that point, not very much silverwork. And so when I finally got back to in the studio silverwork, I started taking classes at Brookfield Craft Center in Connecticut. And there was a crazy, wonderful, amazing artist named Anne Marie Chiaffini who taught there. And she had a Wednesday night session, and she insisted that every new to her student start out with a very specific project. I hate that. I hate being told what project I'm going to do. But I did it, and I'll show that to you in another session. It was a domed hollow form ring, and I understand in retrospect why she chose that project, but it was so not me. And then she let us go a little bit more in our own vein. And she a few weeks after discovering that I was bringing back skills that I had and had sort of lost by attrition, she gave me a very backhanded compliment about my finish and the way that I worked. And she said, you have I think she might have even gone so far as to say a rustic elegance or something like that. But whatever it was not quite a compliment, but also not quite not a compliment to me. It was articulating that my style was not as finished as a finished bench jeweler would normally do. And she was right. I was not finishing things well, but also over the next decade, I would learn that that's okay as long as I do it with intent, right? So I need to embrace and intentionally put in rough textures, put in abstract shapes, not have the precision, because I will never have the patience to be that, wedding ring, traditional, finished, polished look. It's not my style. It's not what interests me. And it just really literally bores me to tears to go to that level. Could I do it if I had to? Yeah, but I would be miserable. So at that point, I started embracing texture actively. I started embracing form and negative space and abstract forms. And so the hammer texture, specifically this cross peen, appeals to me a great deal. I'm not a fan from my work. I'm not a fan of the ball end of the ball peen, but I like the flat line that gives that sort of bark-like effect. And so looking back, some of my earliest evolution of texture started there, bringing in that intent to put a thematic line through it. And so you'll find it on almost all of my collections that there is some hand hammer texture. The woven work, every individual strand is hand textured all the way down the strand. The ephemeris collection with the raw sapphires, all the bands are hammer textured. So texture is my jam. Texture is the theme that is almost constant throughout my work. So long story, but that's how I got there. All right. Any other questions for me before I send you back to your own benches?
Only I think I met you there at Brookfield because I.
Oh yeah, Robert, your name looked familiar. I just couldn't put context on it.
Yeah, but then you're up in Seattle now. Is that where you are?
I'm in Portland now. Did you take classes from Anne Marie?
No, I had class. That's where I took John.
Yep.
I had John and Leslie. Took class with Leslie there.
Yep.
And
so
then
Leslie was just leaving as I got heavily involved, and I became the studio manager after her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Anybody else have questions or things that you need a boost on for next time?
Why are we meeting only once a month?
Because I have other stuff I have to do. You all can, the twice a month was doing me in for my schedule.
Yeah.
And I have both personal
had
and
so much
lasting.
fun before. Why don't you find another book? I really love that project that you did.
Yeah. So the book one was a labor of love for John and for his teaching style, and because I had so many classes with him that and his encouragement to have his students pass on what they learned from him. I don't know that I would be as comfortable doing that with the book of a stranger. Nor is it something that will help my practice terribly much. Whereas this exercise will definitely help my practice. So for now, this is what you got.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Say that again?
Absence makes the heart grow fonder. We'll
Yeah.
look forward to the next one.
Yeah. So, but you have goals. Hopefully you get some ideas for what you can each work on your own boxes, and hopefully get a little creative bit in there, not just the destruction part.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Sure. I will see y'all next time, and this video will go up in probably about a week. Bye all.
Be well. Thank you so much.